Yeah, it definitely opens up a lot more possibilities. Like I didn't realize how much drinking was holding me back. I mean, I did it at the end, I did, but in the beginning, when it was still working pretty good, like I thought it was adding so much to my life, and I didn't realize that it held me at where I was for so long and really kept me from going where I really wanted to go.
Yeah, that's about the truth of it right there. It fools you, and not just alcohol, but whatever drug you're probably anybody's doing that's fun. Yeah, it fools you into thinking that it's adding to your life, that it's supercharging you and making you more creative and more fun and a better performer, um and really the opposite is true. What's
Absolutely.
Well, tell me what your life was like before you got sober.
I guess I'll go back to in the last 3 years. That's when my drinking really took a turn for the worse. So if we go back to like the moment before I got sober, it was absolutely pathetic. Drinking had completely taken over my life. I hadn't held a real job in probably 3 years. The only job I could hold down was a morning bartending gig. So I actually opened a bar in Northern California at 6 a.m. That's when you could start drinking.
Oh,
And I
geez.
would bartend till noon. And so
Oh
my whole
man.
life, all my dreams, all my hopes and my dreams boiled down to that. And so what I would do is I'd wake up in the morning uh, with just horrible DTs. So I detoxing every single morning. I would need a drink immediately. Smart enough. I actually thought this was a smart idea to take my first drink in my bathroom because it was about 50-50 that I could hold it down. And so I would try to take my first drink. Sometimes I'd puke. Sometimes I'd hold it down. Sometimes it'd take 2 or 3 tries. And when I would hold that first drink down, I'd get a slight moment of relief. And I knew that that was the best it was going to get for that day. And then I'd go to the bar. I'd work for 6 hours. I would drink as much as I possibly could for free for those 6 hours. I'd hope I'd make enough tips to buy me a bottle for the way home, buy me a couple of packs. Food was optional, and then have enough gas money to get back to the bar the next day. And that really is what my life boiled down to
Yeah,
at the
that
end.
sounds awful.
It was.
And what kind of customers do you have when you run a bar from 6 a.m. to noon?
I had one guy who worked graveyards, so he had, I guess, the most legitimate excuse to be drinking at that time because he was just getting off work. Most of the other people were people who drank like I did.
Wow, that's got to be
It was
depressing.
I was it was, and it was, and the funny thing is, like, I one of the biggest things I hear people say when it their struggle to get sober is like, I don't know how to have fun sober. And that was even what I was saying to the last, because I thought I didn't know how to have fun sober. But like I just described that life. There is no fun in that life. Maybe occasionally I might have a fun afternoon, but the life was very sad. It was very depressing, and I was surrounded by other people who drank exactly like I did. So it was being in that environment of people who drank like that. But I was holding on to, like, so drinking wasn't like that the whole time. Like if drinking was like that from day one, I wouldn't have drank for so long. So I held on to the memories of what it was like drinking in college when college was fun. And just always the thought of like, maybe one day I'll be able to get back to that point. Maybe one day I'll be able to still go to work and drink. Maybe one day I'll still be able to hold relationships or have lasting out and have fun, because I wasn't having fun anymore. So a lot of it is we get stuck on what it was like when it actually provided something. I mean, when I took my first drink, it wasn't misery. Like it provided me so much. Like it provided me relief. It provided me, you hear a lot of people describe their first drink, and when you listen to them describe it, they're describing freedom most often. Whether it was someone who dealt with horrible social anxiety, and the first time they drank that went away. That is a huge sense of freedom. Or someone who wasn't good around women, and all of a sudden they drank and they were able to go hit on a girl at a bar. That is a huge sense of freedom. So like in the beginning, there was a huge sense of freedom to my drinking, and I chased that and I didn't. And once it started getting bad, I didn't. When you lose that sense of freedom and what it was providing, you don't realize you're getting stuck in a rabbit hole, and you get to a point where it just becomes necessary. And usually, once it gets to that point, it's too late. You're in, and a lot of times at that point, you know how to get out.
Yeah, golly. You brought up a good point there when you said you had DTs every morning, and that is, as far as I understand it, that part of the misery of a hangover is the fact that you're going through withdrawal.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what a hangover is. It's all the toxins that are in your body from alcohol. You're usually dehydrated, but yeah, it's all going through and that's why the hair of the dog. You know,
Yeah,
people talk about that's the best cure for a hangover is to drink. I mean, I hate to say it, it's not the healthy way to live, but that's true, and it's because you're ending your detoxes. So as horrible as
yeah,
I felt in the morning when I woke up, and as hard as it was to get the drinks down, and I mean my like the shakes I'd have every morning, like even the other guys in the bar that drank at 7 a.m., they would tell me, they're like, dude, you need another drink. Like it hurts watching your hand shake that bad.
oh God,
And drinking would take away the shakes. But all
yeah,
it was doing, it was stopping the detoxes. And so you get into that vicious cycle.
yeah. That's You're at the point there where the cause of the problem is is also the cure, or the cure. What you think is the cure is also the cause.
Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of obvious at that point, but it's not obvious for most of the time. Um, what made you want to quit drinking? How did you decide to quit?
So I had no plans on quitting, to be honest. And it wasn't that I didn't want to. At that point, like I knew how bad my life was, but I honestly did not know anybody who drank like I did that successfully got sober. People who drink like I did, they die. And I actually I accepted that fact. And and I was very suicidal. I was actually planning out my suicide. I went from thinking about it to fantasizing about it to actually planning it. And so, like, I just wanted to end the misery. I wanted to end the misery of everybody around me that I was causing. I could see the destruction I was causing. I could see the pain it was causing people in my life. And I honestly just thought the world would be better off without me. So I had no plans on quitting. Now, I'll tell you the story of what changed. Uh, I was staying at a guy's house that was renting me a room. He was actually one of the guys who was go to the bar every day at 6 a.m. And I passed out for the day. And about 4 o'clock, he knocked on my bedroom door and he's like, "Hey, your mom's here. She says you guys are going to dinner." Now, I'm a blackout drunk. I at the end, I blacked out every single time I drank. So it was not uncommon for me to make plans with people and forget about them. And I was too embarrassed to admit when I did it. So when someone showed up on my door knocking and saying I had dinner plans, I just put on my shoes and went with them. And so that's what I did. I got in the car and me and my mom went to dinner. And we were sitting at the dinner table and we just did our order and we're sitting there and my mom starts talking to me about rehab. And that I was very defensive when people would tell me I needed to quit. And I would respond in a way that I would want it to be so uncomfortable for them that they would not want to have that conversation with me again. And that had happened with my mom before. So I was really surprised she was talking to me about rehab. I thought she'd learned her lesson. And so I was sitting there and I just kept getting more and more angry. So I decided to go to the bathroom. I excused myself to go to the bathroom. And I was sitting in the bathroom and it wasn't to calm down. Like I was plotting what I was going to say to my mom because I did not want to have this conversation. So I was getting ready to go out and go tell my mom that, and my phone buzzed. Someone texted me. So I looked at my text messages, and as I was scrolling through them, I saw the text from my mom saying, "I'm going to come over and get you for dinner." And I opened that up, and I seen a text that I sent to my mom the night before that said, "I'm ready to quit. If you could find me a rehab, I'll go."
Oh, wow.
So at that moment, before I stepped
Jeez.
out of the bathroom, I'm sitting at this bathroom in a Mexican restaurant, and I'm just imagining in my head, I'm playing it through what almost happened. So here my mom finally, like my mom, I know had been praying for this moment for years, and so in her eyes, all of her prayers have been answered. And so I imagine me going out back to that table and absolutely breaking her heart again in front of a restaurant full of people. And at that moment, I got the first glimpse of truly who I became. And like it just devastated me, not for me because I already hated myself. It devastated me for my mom. And so at that moment, like I said before, I didn't know if I was going to be able to quit drinking. I honestly did not think I had a chance, but at that moment, just a little bit of me said I'm willing to try. So I went down and sat at the table and I told my mom, okay, you find me a rehab, I'll go. And that's what started my journey this last time.
Wow. I'm just sitting here trying to imagine what it must feel like to look at a text you wrote your mother that you don't remember writing, and it says totally the opposite of what you're about to go try to say to her. That must be a bizarre, disorienting sort of situation.
It wasn't uncommon for me not to remember,
You're getting
but
used to it by then, huh?
yeah, but I mean, if you ever met my mom, she is the sweetest person you'll ever meet. And everybody who meets my mom's like, I love your mom. She's so sweet. Like, so to do that to her, like that just, and I already knew like in her heart, from slowly from my drinking, but like the fact that I was going to do that to her in a public place and intentionally, like it wasn't like I got drunk and did something stupid to hurt my mom. Like this was me intentionally going and breaking my mom's heart. And
Yeah.
that's what I was about to do. And like I knew I couldn't live with myself being that person. So like I only had two options at that point. I could continue my plan to kill myself, or I could try to get sober. So
Hmm.
like I said I'm gonna go try to get sober, and suicide was still my backup plan, to be honest, but I was gonna try that first.
Wow. Suicide's plan B. Yeah, you better be trying real hard for plan A at that point.
Yes.
Did did uh did the rehab work?
It helped. It definitely did. So I was living in Sacramento at the time, and my mom found me a rehab in Battle Creek, Michigan, where they make Kellogg cereal. And the reason why she sent me across the country was because she was worried if she put me in a rehab in Sacramento that something happened. Every time almost anybody goes to a rehab, sometime in the first week or two, you're like, this place sucks. I hate it here. It's not helping. I'm out. And she knew that if I was in Sacramento, that I had plenty of people that I could call and say, come pick me up. So I flew all the way to Battle Creek, Michigan. And the rehab helped. The biggest help for me is it completely separated me out of my environment,
Yeah,
and it
that's
was a safe place. Like
mhm.
there was no lockdown rehab facility. Uh, Anytime, like once a week, we got to go on a field trip, fully chaperoned. They breathalyzed you when you came back. So I mean, it was very locked down. So there wasn't temptation while you were there. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
struggles because now you have to deal with being sober and all your thoughts and guilt and shame and everything flooding you. But it really environment. I ended up there for 60 days. I was afraid to leave. It was a self-paced rehab, and I did all the work in a couple of weeks, but I didn't turn it in because I didn't want to. I was scared to leave.
Mhm.
So like honestly, if they would have offered me a janitor job there and a room to stay in, I would have took it at that time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, not having temptation and being separated from your daily usual habits and environment, are two strategies that I believe strongly in. And I mean, look what I've done. Like I live on a sailboat now, and I'm not even in the same country.
Yeah.
I have no temptation because I'm by myself on a sailboat, so I'm never tempted by alcohol. And I changed my entire life. Did you have any other drug problems, or was it just alcohol?
Alcohol is my the one one that took me down. I did drugs, but I never seeked out drugs, but
Hmm.
I rarely turned them down. So,
Hmm.
you know, if I was at a party and someone broke out cocaine, I wasn't saying no, but like I didn't have a coke dealer, you know. Now near the end, I would say the last 2 or 3 months, like I was taking anything I could get my hands on. So if someone had some extra pills, I was taking pills. So it really was, because at that point, like alcohol had no effect on me. I would still get drunk, I would still get intoxicated, but as far as like quiet, like I couldn't drink enough to quiet my head. So that's when I was like, okay, someone had some pain pills, I'm popping pain pills while I'm drinking. You know,
Yeah.
a friend of mine came across a bunch of mushrooms, I was eating handfuls of mushrooms. Like, so I was trying to do anything at that point, but mostly it was alcohol was my detriment.
Hmm. And how do you feel about the other drugs now? Are you completely clean and sober now?
Yeah, yeah. I personally don't do them. I know there's a lot of people who are California sober, so they just smoke pot. Um, and my opinion on that is like everybody's different. You know, I mean, you really, you know, I've seen like marijuana. That's a big one. That's one of the biggest questions I get asked, either in my group or from people who reach out to me individually. They're like, "Hey, I'm quitting drinking. Do you think it's still okay if I smoke pot?" And it's I see I've seen three categories of people that do it. I see some people that do it, and you know, it doesn't seem to have too much a negative effect on them. That's a small population. The biggest population I see is it doesn't have the same consequences of their drug of choice, whether it was alcohol or heroin or whatever. It doesn't have that same level of consequences. So in their mind, they're like, hey, no consequences. I'm not getting DUIs. I'm still going to work every day. But what it does for a lot of people is it really kills their motivation. So they're not growing. They're not creating a life that makes them excited to be sober. And they really just create this dull life. And then at some point you're like, okay, is this really worth it? And then that does it. And then I see, like, when I was still going to AA, I used to sponsor a guy that he would smoke pot on a Friday night. He would at 7, he'd be drinking by 9, and he'd be calling his meth dealer by midnight.
Oh
Like
God.
that, because it affect his train of thought, it affect his decision making, and it affected him so much that like he did it through the consequences of it. So
Yeah.
I mean, if someone's considering smoking pot, like you got to realize like those are the options. Like rarely do I see it improve someone's life long term, but you know, it's individual. So I really, on things like that, I don't have a lot of like standard, like across the board answers, but it's really about getting honest with yourself. And I think and looking at what's your motivation for it. Like,
Hmm.
are you smoking pot to still escape? You know, and a lot of it's like, okay, like I have really bad anxiety and it helps me with my anxiety. Well, that's why you drink. So you're just replacing one with the other. So you really got to get honest with yourself and see what your motivation for, and see like, okay, like how is this going to affect me long term? Where is this going to lead me? Is that somewhere a life that I'm going to be truly happy in? Well, if it's not, then you know, maybe you need to find some other alternatives for treating your anxiety or whatever your motivation is for wanting to dabble with whatever other substance.
Yeah, those are some good points. I was 4 or 5 times a day pot smoker while I was drinking. I was a 12 pack a day drinker and a smoke pot all day smoker. And I quit drinking before I quit smoking weed. I continued to smoke while I was quitting, and I think it helped. I would not recommend someone start smoking pot to quit drinking, but if you're doing both, it's probably better not to try to quit them both at the same time. But then once I was sober, once I wasn't drinking, I realized, okay, pot is just another drug. It's holding me down just like alcohol was. The consequences aren't as bad, but there's still serious consequences. Mainly, like you said, it's muddling your life up. It makes you think everything's just fine when you're not performing to your ultimate, your high. You're not getting the most out of life. You're not performing as high as you could. You're not making the best decisions. You're okay with whatever it is going on at the time. So anyway, I tried to quit 6 months later and couldn't. I was it just kicked my ass for a whole month. I was going through withdrawal from weed, which was completely unexpected, for an entire month. At the end of the month, I was 4 days in a row with no sleep, 4 nights, 0 hours of sleep in a row, which is completely untenable, unmanageable. So I started smoking again, and then a year later, I finally quit, and now I'm 7 years without smoking, 8 years without drinking.
Yeah, and
So that's
that shows one thing. So you talked about how you couldn't sleep for 4 days. So a
yeah,
lot of times what will happen when you become dependent on something like marijuana or alcohol or something. So you quit, you can't sleep, you smoke, you can sleep. And then your brain says, well, I need this to sleep. So now
exactly.
you're doing it to treat a symptom. And it's the same thing. Like when you
Yeah,
one of the biggest symptoms of quitting marijuana is depression. Like it will throw you into a pretty deep depression.
absolutely. Yeah,
You
anger
smoke,
too.
and it's just like me drinking in the morning. It gets rid of the hangover, but the alcohol caused the hangover. So
Exactly. The cause is the cure. The cure is the
yes.
cause.
And so, but it's logical for someone, and I see where there's that logical connection where it's like, well, when I feel depressed, I smoke pot and I don't feel as depressed. So it's helping treat the depression. And so that's where you really, and you have to get through that initial period. And it's that initial period is the hardest one. So when you drank and smoked, like if you had to choose between one or the other, which like if you could go get a 12 pack or you could go get a bag, which one would you get?
Oh, right now?
No, I'm when you drank and smoked.
Oh. Oh, if I had to choose back then? Oh my gosh. I don't know. I never had to choose. I was I would have been miserable without either. I went many years without ever going a day without either. So I don't know.
Yeah.
They would both cause terrible anxiety to I mean, when you run out of beer, you know you can go to the beer store and get more beer, or you can go to the 24-hour gas station and get more beer at any time. In America, there's never a time when you can't go get beer, unless you live in a blue county. But with the weed, it's harder to get, or it was when I
I
was
was gonna say
smoking.
not anymore. we
I'm
got
so glad
drive-through pot shops here in
God,
Arizona.
I'm so glad I quit before it got legal. But with the weed, I would get terrible anxiety just when my bag was getting low, because I
Yeah.
would think like, God, what if I run out and then I can't get more, And yeah, it was tough. It was tough quitting. The weed was harder for me to quit than the alcohol. And I wasn't the same kind of drinker you were. I was a beer drinker, which I don't think has the same uh, consequences as liquor. But yeah, both of them were hard to quit, and that's a point I try to make whenever I talk about this. That marijuana is not the benign plant slash not a drug that a lot of people think it is. It is a drug. It's just like all the rest of them. It's not as bad as alcohol. Alcohol is not as bad as heroin, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's always something worse. There's probably something worse than heroin. Fentanyl, straight fentanyl
Yeah.
is worse than heroin. So there's always
As soon as
something.
we find a new worse, they create something else. you
I
know.
know exactly. Oh gosh. So anyway, I quit without AA. How do you feel about Alcoholics Anonymous?
So I currently don't go to AA, but when I first got out of rehab, so I never had plans on going to AA. I specifically went to a rehab that advertised that they were non-12 step based. And then I got there and realized that they just basically stole the 12 step program, rewrote it. And
Made it like
it was
13 steps.
honestly, it was 12 steps on steroids. Like like in AA, you have the fourth and the fifth step, which everybody dreads, which is you do an inventory and then you share it with your sponsor. He essentially did that in groups. So you had
Oh,
assigned groups and you would go through stuff and then you'd have to present it out to the group. And then everybody who already went through that step you'd step out of the room and then people would vote on whether they thought you were thorough enough. You come back in the room, everyone would either clap or stay silent. It was but when I was I'm getting ready to graduate rehab and I'm meeting with my exit counselor who is going to stay in touch with me. And what they told me is they're like, well, if you want to stay sober, you got to go to AA. And I'm like, well, I thought you guys weren't an AA type program. And they're like, well, if we would have told you that, you wouldn't have came here, right? So
You
honestly,
liars.
when I got out of rehab, I was, like I said, I didn't want to leave because I was so afraid. Because at that point, I knew I didn't want to drink anymore. I just didn't know if I couldn't. So I got out of rehab. I kept being told like that was the only way. Um, and I had a friend who I drink with, and she'd been sober for a while, and she invited me to a meeting. So I started going to AA, and I was hardcore AA for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, hardcore. Like I had sponsor. I worked the steps. I've sponsored dozens of guys through the steps. I've held just about every service commitment you could in Alcoholics Anonymous. I spoke a lot. And so I was really hardcore until I realized it just wasn't aligning with me and what I wanted in life. And so at that point, well, I pondered it for probably 2 years before I finally got the courage to actually leave.
Hmm. Yeah, I respect AA. I've been to about 3 meetings. The first one was court ordered for a DUI, but and I read their book, and I respect them, and I definitely probably do some of the things, some of the 12 steps. Most of them probably. I kind of came up with my own method, but it just doesn't work for me. I'm not a group. I'm never going to go to group therapy, unless I'm court ordered to go to group therapy. And I think there's lots of people like that, and I think we all need to know that you can do it without AA. It's possible. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm 8 years sober, and I haven't been to even one meeting since the last time I quit. I've quit 3 times in my life, but this time I finally
Yeah,
stuck
and
it.
it's probably been 7 years. I went to one meeting. I had a friend. I've got sober in Northern California after I got out of rehab, and then I moved back to Phoenix, which I went to college here. And so when I got back here, uh, is when I left. And so I went to one meeting when a friend of mine from Sacramento came into town and wanted me to take him to a meeting. So even though I wasn't doing AA anymore, I went. And like I said, there are issues that I personally have with Alcoholics Anonymous, more around the fellowship than what's taught in the book, even though there's some things in the book that I think maybe are a little outdated or not for everyone. But I mean, but that's me personally. And a lot of people, because I post content online about some of my stuff, my issues, and I talk about on my podcast of issues that I personally had with AA. And sometimes I get a lot of flack from people saying I'm bad mouthing AA, and I'm not. If AA works for you, I'm not going to try to talk you into stopping AA. Like, my message is find what works for you, and then go all in on that, and understand that that may not be your lifelong solution. You got to be flexible. What works for you today, if you're growing and changing, your solution a year ago should not work today.
Hmm.
Because you're growing and you're evolving, and and you're going to need something else if you want to continue to grow and evolve. So just be flexible, be open to different types of recovery. And I got a lot out of it. It just that there was a lot of problems that even from the beginning that just didn't sit right. And I finally was able to get honest with myself and realize that my path wasn't Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hmm. So let's talk about growth and change. What are some of the ways that you changed besides just being sober?
Pretty much everything. I mean, it really, one of the biggest things is healing. There was most studies that have been done say that like 70 to 75% of people who have heavy addictions experience some sort of major trauma in their life. And so a lot of my drinking was around stuffing those feelings down. And also, if you were, I mean, we were raised in the same generation, where you're watching your dad's watched John Wayne movies, and like John Wayne didn't show any emotion. Just pull up your bootstraps and do it. So I was really raised on like in a society of stuffing your emotions down and not feeling them. And so one of the biggest changes in me over the years, and it's been over the biggest growth of that's probably been over the last 5 years, has really been facing a lot of the things that I've been trying to run from. And that's where my biggest growth has been from. It's from healing from those things. And it's not just the things that happened to me when I was younger that may have led to that may have contributed to a lot of my addiction, but there was a lot of things I did when I was drinking that I felt a lot of shame about. And when I first got sober, like I didn't want to feel that. And so like I just would try to find anything else to try to avoid that. And you see a lot, and that's where a lot of cross addiction comes from. And for me, like for me, it was other things. So like food was a big one, man. I ate, when I quit drinking, I ate my emotions. Like, and so that's been the biggest catalyst of my growth, is actually sitting with those emotions, really understanding what's stemming from them, and then changing my patterns on how I deal with it.
What are some fun things that you do now that you didn't do when you were drinking?
The the biggest one is really the last couple of years I started doing a lot of traveling. I planned on starting to do it before COVID. I had all kinds of plans, and then COVID hit. And then the second COVID opened back up, I was gone. I was in Costa Rica. Uh, that was my first passport trip of my
Such
adult
a great
life.
country. I love that. I love
Oh,
Costa
I
Rica.
can't wait to go back. I absolutely loved it there. I love it's a much slower society, except the driving. Like it is playing Frogger trying to cross the street there, and pedestrians do not have the right of way. But except for the driving, like it is such a much more chill, like people aren't in a hurry. People actually want to get to know you. People want to conversate. Right. And so I started traveling. When I was in Costa Rica, I was staying at a place in the cloud forest. Uh, and I happened to meet some guys from Brazil, from the Yawanawa tribe. They were there doing something, and got to know them without us knowing each other's language. We created a friendship. There happened to be someone there that spoke Portuguese and English, and they invited me to go visit them in their village in the Amazon. You
Wow.
know,
Have you
so
been?
I was so 2 months later, I'm in the Amazon in Brazil, living
No
with the
way.
Yawanawa tribe for a couple of weeks. And
Wow.
like those are the things I couldn't do when I was still drinking. Like
Yeah.
it really is just the opportunity to be able to say yes to things like that. And just and that's it. I experience life now. I didn't experience life before. So I get to experience life fully, you know. So
Yeah.
it was so to be able to go do that and 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 just to be able to, even in the relationships that I have in my life now, they're more real, you know. And so it just opens up all kinds of fun things, like all the things I thought I couldn't do. Like when I first got sober, I thought, okay, I'm never gonna be able to go to a concert again. I'm never gonna be able to go to a sporting event again. You know, all these different things you think you're not going to be able to do, and all the things that I still loved, that I thought I only loved because I could drink while I was doing it. Like I've been able to experience all that. You know, I'm a huge Arizona Diamondbacks fan. They made it to the World Series this year, and me and my mom, I love baseball, and my mom used to take me to A's games when I was a kid, and that we have such a huge connection. And I was able to take her to a World Series game this year. Like, I mean, those are the types of things I get to experience that I never would have before.
Yeah. That's so true. That's something that I tell people is that, you need to reward yourself for being sober, and you need to do things that you couldn't do when you were drinking. And those things are going to happen eventually, but it's good to think about it when you're just now getting sober and start planning them out so that you can feel the rewards. Because there is so much more to do than sitting around getting drunk, which is basically like doing nothing, but it feels like doing something, you know, like you're at a
Yeah,
bar drinking, you're not really doing anything besides
no,
drinking.
You're sitting with the same people telling the same stories because none of you have done anything. So you don't have no new stories. And that's a thing. And that's one of the things when I tell people, like, when they're getting sober, I tell them, like, you got to get honest about your relationship with alcohol and your current relationship with alcohol. Because that was the thing. I'm like, I don't know how to have fun sober, but I hadn't had fun sober. Literally, my day was sitting around on the same bar stool, talking to the same people about the same things every single day. Like that wasn't fun, you
Yeah.
know? And I love your point about imagining the life you're going to want to lead, because that's so key, because most people that I see relapse, they live a similar lifestyle, but they just take away the alcohol. So you go from sitting on a bar stool all day to sitting at home and doing nothing. And that was part of my struggle early in recovery, is all I did every day for years was I'd go to work, I'd go to a meeting, I'd go home. That was my life, and yeah, I was sober, but that life was pretty dull. And so there was no excitement. There was nothing to look forward to. Like, I was simply just trying to survive. I wasn't living.
Yeah.
And so I got stuck in that same, and you could only survive that for so long. And so, like, it with sobriety. Yeah, I was sober, but I wasn't doing anything to try to build a better life. There wasn't anything to look forward to.
Yep. Yeah. I realized that drinking had taken place of my thirst for addiction, for addiction, for adventure.
Yeah.
When I was younger, before I had a drinking problem, I was always going on cool adventures. And the more I drank, the more drinking fulfilled the same urge, the same need. The alcohol filled it up, with the, boring activities that are enhanced, by the alcohol. So when I got sober, I realized that, and then I started thinking, okay, what are some big badass adventures that I can do now that I couldn't do before? And you can't really go on any great adventures when you're drinking heavily. You can't go on a long canoe trip, or you can't go on a long sailing trip. There's a whole lot you can't do. You can't ride a bicycle, like you're not going to go mountain biking when you're drunk. And that's what's led to where I am now, and which is a million times more exciting than anything I did before. Do you still have cravings?
Not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was weird. So the alcohol cravings, I was one of the lucky ones. They were removed pretty early. And I think a lot of it was fear. When I was in rehab, I mean, obviously I had initial cravings pretty bad from the detoxes, but I was medically detoxed. So they weren't as bad as they would have been. They drugged me up pretty bad, or pretty good. And so, like, I didn't experience the whole withdrawal symptoms. Initially when I got out, it wasn't the craving to drink, really. It was the craving. I was really having trouble stepping away from my old world. So it was things like, I'm sitting at home, I'm bored, I'm looking at my phone, I'm on social media, and I'm still following all of my old friends. So I'm bored, I'm at home, and all of a sudden I see that someone's having a party that night. And that's where, like, it wasn't even the craving to drink. It was the feeling of being left out. It was a feeling of still wanting to be included. It was a lot of FOMO, to be honest. It was like, oh man, if I was still drinking, I'd be able to go hang out with all my old friends. And of course, pictures they're posting, and they're having a blast. And so it was really just feeling like I was missing out on that. But the drinking cravings, luckily, far and few between. The closest I ever came, I would say, and I didn't have them for a while, but I'd say about 18 months sober. I just had my first failed attempt at a sober relationship. It ended horribly. I was devastated. I went to work that day. I couldn't even make it about an hour at work. And I just told my boss I have to go home. And I stopped at a liquor store on the way home just to get a Diet Coke. And, like, as soon as I pulled into that liquor store, all of a sudden, before I even got out of my car, all of a sudden a thought came to like, you know what, a drink sounded better. And so I sat in my car just with that internal debate, and I was about to give in, and some dude knocked on my window. I rolled down the window, and it was this dude that had the shakes like I used to. And he was straight up honest. And he's like, dude, like, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I'm going through the detoxes really bad. I just need a drink so bad to calm it. And I gave that dude a 20 and I drove off. And I gave him
Wow.
a 20. I gave him my phone number. I told him, like, dude, I know exactly how you're feeling. I've had the shakes like you. You ever want help? Give me a call. For now, here's some money to get your fix. And I didn't even go in the store to get the Diet Coke. I just it just
Woo.
that quick reminder, and seeing myself, because he was a young dude, he was in probably his late 20s, and it was just I was seeing myself again, and it was just that reminder of like, because for that moment of weakness, all I wanted to do is take away the pain that I was feeling, and I knew alcohol would temporarily, but I
Hmm.
wasn't thinking. And you'll hear a lot of people say play the tape through. When you're in that moment, like, you're not tape through, you're not thinking about calling someone. Like, in that moment, like, all I cared about was taking the pain away. And I was so, I mean, I was blessed that like I got to have a moment of seeing something like that to snap me back to reality. And that's the closest I've ever been to drinking since I quit this time. I tried a couple of times before, uh, but yeah, that was the closest I'd ever been. But like today, like it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I could be around it. Uh, I could go over to my brother-in-law's house when he's having a barbecue and everybody's drinking and having a good time. They're always like, "Hey, we got Diet Dr. Pepper for you," and I just over, and it doesn't bother me being around it. Like, I used to travel a lot for work, and it's typical. We go there, we're meeting with some people to try to help their business. You always go out to dinner afterwards, always drinks flowing. Like, it doesn't bother me to be around it, just because I there's something so powerful in changing your identity. And that's one of the things, like, when I was still going to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was the fear was still so strong, because it was, you're always an alcoholic, you're always going to be powerless. Like, I had all of that in my mind, so the fear was there. So even though I didn't have a temptation, like, when I was around it, my level of anxiety was like a 9, because the message that you get there is like, the second you let your guard down, you're in danger. So like, I thought the whole world was dangerous. Like, okay, if you're too confident, you might drink. Oh crap, now I'm too confident, now I need to be less confident. Like, it was insane. But once I removed that, once I got away from that environment, and I started trusting my own intuition and my own ability not to drink, like, at some point my identity changed. Like, I don't drink. It's really that simple. I
Yep.
don't drink. So like, there isn't a temptation. Like, and people are like, I don't understand how it could be. And I said, okay, well, I was asking a guy who was telling me, like, he couldn't imagine having an identity and have it not be that. And I looked at him, and I knew this guy was an amazing husband to his wife. And I asked him, I said, well, do you hit your wife? And he goes like, of course I don't. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, I don't hit women. And I'm like, okay, you're right. Some people have trouble with anger and controlling their anger. And I'm like, but you have your identity and that set so strong that no matter what happened, you wouldn't do that. And I'm like, you could do the same with alcohol. Like, I just don't drink. So like, it
Hmm.
doesn't bother me. And there's I can't explain the level of freedom in that, when it's completely controlled me. I've been completely the opposite, you know.
Yeah, I used to repeat their mantra, I don't drink anymore. I don't drink anymore. I don't
Yeah.
drink anymore. I used to say that to myself many times a day. It was one of my strategies to do exactly what you just said, to change my identity. Um, and now I don't drink anymore. And often when people, if someone I don't know and I'm never going to see him again offers me a drink, I just say no, thank you. If anybody who I know or I think I might see again offers me a drink, I say no, I don't drink. I don't drink. Label me right now in your head as Paul who doesn't drink,
Yeah.
because I don't drink. And it's okay to offer me a beer this first time, but it's not going to be. I don't tell them this, but this is the way it is. It's not going to be okay if you offer me a beer a second time, unless it's a true mistake. Um, you know,
Yeah. But in your experience, how many people offer you the beer the second time?
never.
I'm
It's
guessing
never
not many.
happened. It's never
And
happened.
see, and that's the thing. Like, there was so much. Like when I first got sober, everybody was like, "Okay, this is how you got to handle when people offer you a drink." And like, there's this fear of like everybody's going to be pushing alcohol on you. And like, what I
No.
found, and so I was worried everybody was going to wonder why I don't drink, and there was all kinds of like people gave me strategies and excuses to make, and I would do that, but that would actually pique curiosity. Like you tell someone you're allergic, people are going to want to know how you're allergic from alcohol. You tell someone, "Oh, I got plans later tonight." All of those invite follow-up questions. When I
Yeah.
change it to just telling people like I don't drink, like most
Yeah.
people don't care.
Yeah. There's no comeback to that, unless they're a total jackass.
No, but
And if they are, you need to just cut them out of your life, completely.
and
That's
the
what I
only
think.
people that I've found who asked me follow up questions about not drinking were either people who genuinely wanted to know more about me,
Hmm.
or people who guessed that maybe I used to have a drinking problem and I don't anymore. But they have one themselves, and we're
Yeah.
going to go into that conversation. But what
Yeah.
I found so much more, like obviously when I was in AA, I was anonymous, you know, but once I started, and I'm not anymore, obviously, because I'm all over social media talking about it, and I have a podcast. So, but one of the things when I've talked openly and honestly about it, one of the greatest blessings has been, I can't tell you how many times, like, okay, for example, I was at a podcasting conference in Colorado a couple of months ago, and I was at one of the after parties, and so free booze. Like I cannot believe how many times since I've quit drinking, I've went to places with open bars, and I'm like, where are these places when I used to drink? But there's free booze flowing. And I was talking to a lady, and we're talking about podcasts, and she was going to go to the bar and get a couple more drinks. And I had a Diet Coke in a plastic cup, and she's like, "Oh, do you want another drink?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm good. I don't drink." And then she came back and she goes, "Oh, how come you don't drink?" And I told her, I said, "Well, said actually my whole podcast is about addiction and recovery." And I said, "You know what? I don't drink anymore because I used to have a problem with it and I quit. My life's much better now." And then what happened is we started having a bigger conversation about it. And she had a son who's addicted to heroin,
Wow.
and he's still very active in it. And
Yeah.
so when I told her how bad I was and the fact that I no longer drink and she could see how good I'm doing now, what I did for that lady is I provided her hope,
Oh, good.
you know, and I've had more parents, conversations with parents who have kids that are active in addiction, that I provide them hope that there's a chance for their kid, because most of them don't think there is. And I actually did an episode with my mom on my podcast. Normally, my podcast is solo; it's very informational. But I didn't. My mom's been the only guest I've had on, and in that conversation, I asked her some questions I never have asked her before, and I didn't prep her. And one of the questions I asked her is, I said, "Did you think I was ever going to get sober?" And my mom looked at me and she said, "I was prepared." She's like, "I had already accepted the fact that you were going to die."
Wow.
And so there's so many other parents that I know that I get to talk to. And if I was still quiet about it, if I would get excuses for why I don't drink and I wasn't open, like I would miss all these opportunities to provide a parent hope. Now, that doesn't mean that their son or daughter is going to get sober or going to get off drugs. But like for a moment, I get to provide them hope that maybe they will.
Yep. Yeah. I'm not anonymous either. In fact, my my first book is called Alcoholics Not Anonymous: A Modern Way to Quit Drinking. And I love to talk about it. And I might have misspoke earlier when I said there's no backup question to no follow up question to I don't drink anymore. Of course there is. For those
Yeah.
that are curious, I will talk as long as they want to talk.
Yeah.
And because that's how I quit drinking. I offered a friend a beer at a party and he said, "No, I don't drink anymore." And I just started quizzing them, why, how'd you do it? Why'd you do it? Well, my brother died. My brother just died, he said, or he died a year ago. Guy was younger than me. I think his brother was 40, dead from drinking at 40 years old. A long, slow death, a death that was dragged out over many years of organ failure, internal organ failure. Terrible way to go. And that's why I quit. So I will gladly talk to anybody who wants to talk about it, like we're doing
Yeah.
right now.
Yep.
Because it's God, there's just a million reasons why. Mainly because life is so much better without it in every way, and no doubt about it. Can you give some tips for somebody who's interested in quitting, who wants to quit, but doesn't know how to start?
So, I mean, earlier I talked about getting honest with your relationship with alcohol. So I have an exercise I take people through, and it's about getting connected with your whys. And people talk about your initial why, but I think there's 3 whys that I've found. One is your why do you want to stop drinking? And so I told the story about my mom. And you'll hear a lot of people in recovery say you have to get sober for yourself. I don't agree with that, because I know that in the depths of the end of addiction, most people think so lowly of themselves, like they're not a good enough reason to get sober. I wasn't a good enough reason to get sober. So whatever reason's strong enough for someone to start is a good enough reason. But you really need to get strong with it. Like, I still tell that story about my mom today, and I could go back to that restaurant and I get choked up every time. So you need to have a why that is so strong that you feel it, because I think most people, I, I think the most simple reason why people relapse is your reasons to drink again stronger than your reasons not to. So you need to have a strong reason, and pain is a great motivator. So most people get motivated to quit drinking from pain, but pain wears off. If so if you only are motivated by the pain and the consequences of drinking, as that starts wearing off, and as the other uncomfortable part of being sober starts increasing, eventually your reasons to drink are going to get stronger than your reasons not to. So you need to have a really strong reason for quitting drinking, but that's good for getting started. And then you also want to get into touch with what was your motivation for drinking? So the second why is, why did you start drinking? Like I said, for me, it was a sense of freedom. Most people, it is. Now, if you do not find something to replace that, you're always going to feel like you're missing out. So you found sailing, I've found so much fulfillment in doing my podcast and helping other people, and now traveling and experiencing new cultures and new people, and just experiencing life. So you want to find your reason why you started drinking, because you need to find something that helps fill that same hole. And then the third why is, why did you keep drinking? Because these are going to be your obstacles. When you consider quitting drinking, these are going to be all your obstacles. So it's going to be, I don't know how to have fun sober. I don't know how, I have horrible social anxiety. I don't know how to talk to girls when I'm sober. I'm worried about losing all my friends. Those are the reasons why that keep you drinking. Or or if it's someone experienced a horrible trauma, they're reliving that in their head, and drinking or drugs is the only thing that could quiet that for a second. So you really need to understand those, because and you're not going to jump right into that part when you first get sober, but it's good to understand that, because that is going to be your solution long term. I have a great therapist. I do there. It's helped me immensely. And one of the things my therapist always tells me is the only way is through and not around. Because if you try to addiction, if you're drinking or using drugs to try to avoid that, if you continue to try to avoid those feelings, you're either going to have to look for something else to do it, or you're going to go back to it. So, and then like your experience, you had someone to talk to, you find someone that you could reach out to. You know, I almost didn't quit drinking and almost gave up on life because I didn't know anybody who drank like me that got sober. I didn't know it was possible. And since then, I've met people who, as much as I drank, I've met people who took it way further than I did. You know, one of my roommates in rehab, he wasn't even 40 yet and had advanced cirrhosis. You know, so I mean, I've met a lot of people who've drank way with me and who've gotten sober. So really reach out to people. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Like it's really hard doing this by yourself. You know, and
Mm.
that was one of the biggest benefits I got from AA is there was that sense of community. Like I
Mhm.
realized that it is possible, and then that helped provide me hope, is seeing that it is possible.
Did how did you rebuild your social life after you got sober?
My In the beginning it got worse. So because like I talked about earlier, because my fear of drinking again was so big, and then a lot of what was being said in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous really reinforced that behavior, reinforced that thought that I had in my head that like the world was dangerous. I actually became a hermit for many years. I was actually diagnosed blind agoraphobic at about 3 years sober because I barely left my house. Like if I would have worked from home, if I at that point, I work from home now, but if I would have worked from home then, I probably would have never left the house. So my social life was just meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, and then, but since then, and then, so diagnosed borderline agoraphobic. My social anxiety was horrible. I got put on psych meds to help treat that. Hated the side effects from the psych meds. It helped with the anxiety a little bit, but I realized like I couldn't stay on the psych meds. They weren't helping me, you know. And then that's when I found this new therapist that I've been seeing for many years now. And it was initially to really try to treat the social anxiety. So uh, I had to start rebuilding my social life by facing that fear. Um, and when it's time to face a fear, like I'm more of the what's the worst case scenario, and I'm gonna go do that. And then the stuff that usually scares me day to day isn't gonna seem so bad. So like I couldn't go out to dinner with a group of people. That's how bad my social anxiety was at that point. Like I couldn't go out to dinner with a new group of people I didn't know. So I thought, okay, what can I do that's the like so much further than that dinner doesn't seem bad. And I love Tony Robbins. I listened to a lot of his content. So I went to a Tony Robbins event about 3 weeks off of my anti-anxiety meds.
Holy
I'm in
cow.
LA in a room full of people, and I had no idea what his actual events are. So I'm afraid of socializing. So if you haven't been to a Tony Robbins event, here it is. He speaks, you got a book. He's like, fill out this incredibly personal things about yourself and your struggles and all that. And now go find some stranger and share it with them. And then when you're done with that, now go hug 5 people you don't know. And like and then there was everything that could have been uncomfortable to me. Like he would just random things he'd have you do. He'd be like, find a group of 5 people. And I'd be in a group of 5 people. I'm like, all right, we're going to talk, getting comfortable talking. He'd crank up the movie and he's like, okay, now pick one person, make up a dance. And everybody has to imitate your own dance. So like it was the walking across the fire part easy. I could do stuff like that. I could jump out of planes. I could walk across fire. That stuff doesn't scare me. But like dancing in front of a group of strangers. So really that was my start of it. And so it really was like, okay, if I could go do that, then like now I could start doing it. So it really started with that, and just I had to start putting myself out there. So when I left AA, I didn't have a social group anymore. So I really had to start finding people who had common interests, because it wasn't all about like I think it's good to have people in recovery in your life to talk about things about, especially around that. But like, you could find people in other aspects that could help grow your life. So I'd find something that I might be interested in. So I'm like, maybe I like hiking. I'm like, I remember like enjoying hiking to the pond by my house when I was a kid, but like I didn't go drunk hiking. Like that didn't sound like fun when you're drunk, at least to me. So I'm like, okay, maybe I love the outdoors. I might like hiking. So I joined a Facebook hiking group for people here in Phoenix. And they're like, okay, on Saturday, we're all going to go hike this one. Everybody meet in the parking lot. And I'm like, oh, sounds uncomfortable, but I got to do it. And so it's like, I would just have to force myself through those things of discomfort. And you start doing that. And then you might meet someone in the hiking group that you connect with. Now you exchange numbers. Now you made a friend. And honestly, that's how it's been. I do something that's uncomfortable. I meet one or two people. I make a couple of friends that have a common interest, exchange numbers. Next thing you know, you're invited somewhere. And
Nice.
you just keep doing that.
Nice. I'm listening to you. You like to stay home. You work from home. You're sober, and you like to travel. You could be a sailor.
Yeah.
That's what we
You know
do.
what? My uncle, my mom's side, who was my hero when I was a kid, he lived in a sailboat for many years in Marin. Uh, but I don't think he ever sailed it because he was drunk all the time.
That's the
So
thing. If you live in a marina on a sailboat, you're going to be surrounded by drunks. If you get
yeah,
out and do what I'm doing, sail to faraway places, you're going to find sailors who don't drink because you
and
can't.
he loved to travel. So I'm sure that was his plan, is doing what you're
Yeah,
doing. But it was like, and
you can't do it drunk.
he was so brilliant. And that's the thing. Like I watched him die alcoholism, like when I was still drinking. And this was a man who was brilliant. Uh, he was an inventor. Like he invented. He's the grandfather of computerized engraving. He invented the first computerized engraving system in the 80s.
Wow.
Uh, at one point, he invented the most sophisticated player piano in the world, and Sony bought his patent. Like this is a man that was that intelligent, that could, but you knew that if you wanted him to remember a conversation that you have with him, you had to call him before noon. Like that was the family joke,
Yeah.
and so I saw someone who was so brilliant and so talented and had so many huge dreams, and like he drank a gallon of brandy every day and smoked two
Jeez.
packs of cigarettes.
Oh
You
God.
know,
Yeah. You can't sail and drink. Like it's funny that sailors have a reputation of being drinkers, but the ones that are out here in Panama that sailed here, like everybody in Panama sailed here from somewhere far away.
yeah,
There's nowhere close, right? You can't do that as a drunk. Maybe if you have a lot of crew on your boat, you can do your shift and then drink and then go to sleep. But certainly not shorthanded or single-handed like myself. You can't single-handers can't drink at all. We have to be alert at all times. Um, but you run into, I run into mostly either non-drinkers or people who drink very responsibly. Uh, and none of them have a problem that I don't drink. It's not that uncommon out here. So
yeah,
it's a great a group of people to be surrounded by. People that are out chasing their dreams and being healthy. I love it out here. So speaking of that, what's a dream that you've chased since you quit drinking?
so I'm chasing it right now. So so I get well actually. So I had a good career before I got sober. I made I was a computer programmer during the dot-com boom. So made a bunch of money in my 20s, blew it all, but made a bunch of money. So when I got sober, I was like, okay, I want to get my career back. I'm like, I don't know how many times I heard people say you had so much potential. So I'm like, now I'm going to finally live up to my potential. And so I had the ideal job in my head. I was going to make good money. I was going to have a ton of vacation time. I was going to be able to work from home. I was going to have flexibility. I was going to have freedom. I have all of that now. And I realize it's not what I want. But the beauty of that is like, I'll be able to walk away from it and not have to worry about what if. Like sometimes, like and people, at first I was really disappointed, but I thought, no, actually, like I needed to do this. So like my dream now, like I enjoy helping people so much when it comes to addiction recovery. I love seeing people turn their lives around. I love seeing people who are literally living on the streets, like in as far as the depths of addiction could take you, get their first apartment. Like that's the stuff that lights me up. Like I love like one of my good friends, like the moment he got partial custody of his son back, like I was sitting in the courtroom with him, and like one of the greatest moments of my life, like, and it was him getting partial custody of his son back, and like, and he still sends me pictures of that. So I realize that that's my passion. That's what I love, and so that's what I've started doing. I started my podcast a little over a year ago. I decided when I started it, I said, I'm going to do it for a year. I committed to a year, and I'm like, I'll see where it takes me. About maybe 6 months ago, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start putting stuff on social media. I was scared. Like, to be honest, I was so afraid of judgment. I was afraid of like,
Yeah.
a bunch of AA people showing up with torches.
Yeah.
Like there was so much irrational fear, and like the feedback has been great. And I get messages so often from people who are like, man, I listened to your podcast. I listened to an episode of your podcast, and it completely changed my perspective of what I thought, or I was struck with this and then this. And so like, that's my dream, like, is to be able to help people, like, for that to be what I do, for not just for a living, but like that's my passion. And imagining being able to do something that's your passion full time instead of working a 9 to 5 to try to make money to enjoy other aspects of your life. So that's what the dream I'm chasing now, so I'm doing my podcast, been posting on social media. I'm had a lot of people reach out to me looking for more help. I do not have the time to do one-on-one coaching, especially now because I work 40 plus hours a week. But like, that's not where I think I can make the biggest impact. I've been working on a course that I'm going to launch early next year to really help people. And what it is it's really to help people discover their path. It's not a one size fits all. It's to help people. A lot of the things, that I struggle with in Alcoholics Anonymous was the fact that you're powerless, that you need a higher power. And this is to help people discover their intuition, to help realize their dreams, to first imagine it, like you talked about earlier, and then actually create a path to start like working towards it. Because if you're not having a dream's great, but like you need to be chasing it. It's like watching a motivational video on YouTube. You know how great you feel, but usually there's some action that's supposed to go with that video. And if you don't take the action, like the motivational part, you're going to have to watch YouTube videos all day because you're not getting the results of it. So it's really about helping people, one, realize their dream, and then actually start going towards it. And then, there's a lot of stuff that's alcohol based in this program, like dealing with cravings, how to say no to alcohol, but it's really to help people. And I've helped a lot of people with this method that I've kind of developed over the last 7 years. It's been extremely successful. And so I just want to create an opportunity for more people to be able to do it. I'm looking at trying to build a bigger community, because that was the one part of Alcoholics Anonymous I really missed, so I started a Facebook community. I know you joined it. It's been good. So for about 5,000 people, but I think online communities are great. I don't think it replaces face-to-face human contact, so I know there's been a couple of people there's been people in Australia who've been meeting up that met on my Facebook group. Like, to me, that's so awesome. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to encourage people to be able to, get out and meet people together and help create mini communities so they could get that support they want. And like my big dream is, man, I want to remove the stigma of alcoholism and addiction. And that's one of the problems with it being so anonymous. Is like, that supports shame. It really does. Like you hide stuff you're ashamed from. So,
Yep.
and the thing is, like, I almost killed myself because people, like, there were people in my life that were sober that saw, like, after I got sober and I went into the grocery store and I didn't buy alcohol. Like the lady at the grocery store noticed and she asked me, she's like, not buying beer anymore. And I'm like, no, I quit drinking. And she's like, oh, I've been sober for 8 years. And I'm like, you watch me like come in here slurring drunk, just miserable, you know? And so like, I want to help remove the stigma from alcoholism and from addiction. And I wanted to help encourage other people to speak out about it because it's really stigmatized right now. There's a lot of misunderstanding, even amongst a lot of the organizations that are supposed to be helping people. There's a lot of stigmatism. There's a lot of misunderstanding about addiction. And if I could change the world a little bit, like, and just help people, like that's what I would love to get out of it. I On top of that, like some of the things that you do, like I would love to travel more. I have loved experiencing other cultures. That is my favorite part of traveling. And even in the United States, like, you could go to you go to every small town you go to is different than another small town. And like one of my favorite things to do is I grew up in a small town, so I love small towns. Is find a small town, and every small town has a festival. Once a year, they have something they celebrate. California, there's the garlic
Yep.
festival. Another small town has an asparagus festival. Like, and you find what their big weekend is, and you go there during that weekend. And like you will get to meet the entire community. You'll get to see what they're about. And it's just to be immersed in that and experience that and get different cultures and being open to how other people live life. Like I get so excited about that. And then to be able to like go to Costa Rica, go live with the Yawanawas, see how they do life. Like it's been so great. And I want to do that more. And I know that uh this would help give me the freedom to do that, and it would give me the fulfillment of really helping other people. So that's my dream, is to live a fulfilled life, and be open to change. Like what I think it is today, just like I thought the career I have today was my dream career. Like sometimes you get to the end of a path and you realize it's not your path anymore, and that's okay. It's okay to change your mind, you know, and a lot of people are like, oh man, but you've been working at this company for so long and you're doing so good. Like, wouldn't it be a waste to walk away from that? And I'm like, no, it would be like killing me slowly to stay in something that I no longer feel filled in, that no longer fulfills my purpose or makes me feel good about it. So that's my chasing dreams, man. That's the goal. That's become my life goal, and saying yes more often, even when it scares me.
Right on. Wow. Yeah. That's what my podcast is all about, chasing dreams. And
Yeah, I love your podcast. After you reached out to me, I binge listened it.
oh,
So,
great. Great.
yep,
Thanks. Yeah, this one's brand new to me. This is my second podcast. My first one
yeah,
is offshore sailing and cruising. And I started this one just so I could interview a wide variety of people, and instead of just sailors. Um and yeah, what fun I've been having doing it. And and I love spreading the word about sobriety as well. You made a really good point about how it makes you feel good. It makes you feel better than anything else. I had a revelation years ago. I had just written my first book, which is a very short book about how I quit drinking. It's called Alcoholics Not Anonymous. I mentioned it earlier, and I had no idea how it would do. I self-published it. It's only like you can read the whole book in about 3 hours. I made the cover and the title and everything and self-published it, and I had no clue what would happen. And at some point, I realized that strangers were buying it. Like it sold a few here, it sold a few there, and I thought, well, this could still be like my mother, and a couple of aunts and uncles, trying to support me by buying books. But then at some point, I realized, no, I've sold. It's like consistently selling. This strangers are buying it, and that means some of them are quitting drinking because of a book I wrote. bam, like I feel it right now. It's hitting me right now again. Like and then I thought like, wow, this feels better than a beer and a bong hit.
Oh yeah.
Like like better, like literally. And then on top of that, you realize, well, damn, I've done something now. I've actually, for the first time in my life, I've done something that really legitimately makes the world a better place, you know? And if this is all I do in my whole life, I'm gonna come out ahead, you know? Because it's tough. It's
Isn't it?
tough. It's tough to really do things like that that make the world a better place. It's tough to earn a living in any way that is totally honest and makes the world a better place. And I felt that when at that point when I realized that like strangers were buying my book, and I feel it every time that I get a message on Facebook Messenger or something from someone who said, I quit drinking and your book helped me, or your one of your episodes in your podcast helped me or something. Like, man, that's the best feeling in the world. It's so much better than any drug.
Yeah, and it's an amazing film. Like there are people, and there's people who your book helped that didn't reach out to you, and like it's amazing that there are people walking around this world that you helped shape their life, and and you don't, and it's so when I'm out drinking or I was out doing that, like I was sending a lot of negative, like the things you do have ripple effect, So I would think about like I didn't just affect my like I met a lady who after I got sober, who my mom worked with, and she told me, "Oh my God, I'm so excited that you got sober. Your mom's told me so much about you." And so I realized like that was one of the people that my mom went to for support who really loved my mom. And so like when my mom was really worried about me, this lady was worried about my mom. And then I met this lady's family one time and she had some beautiful children. And I thought, so if this lady's distracted at the dinner table, thinking of being worried about my mom, she's not fully present with her children. And so like it's weird the negative ripples you send out, but the thing is like now I want to replace that with positive ripples. So like would you write in the book, like there's someone who read your book and got sober who is now a better father to their children.
God,
So you're
I know.
not
I
only
think about
making
that.
their life, you are affecting their child's life because you gave them their parent back. Like you're and you could be affecting generations long before you're gone because of that one ripple you sent out, and that's what amazes me. Like you could go on social media and look at like where the people are from. The two biggest cities that follow me on Facebook is both in Australia. Like,
Oh yeah,
and it's and I'm like, it amazes me that there's a bunch of people who hopefully I'm having a positive effect that live in some country I've never been to,
yeah,
that I may be, but even if it's just a little bit, that I may be having a positive effect on their day. Like maybe I don't have a positive effect on their entire life, but I could have helped make their day better. Could have made today
yeah.
a little easier. And
Wow,
that just that's amazing.
you can travel to those cities now and have a lot of friends.
Yes. That's what I figured. I bet you I could post in my Facebook group like, "Hey, I'm going to Australia. Will someone put me up?" And there's probably a couple of people who are like, "Yeah, you can come stay on my couch." And
Yeah,
like that's that's a cool thought.
yeah, absolutely. Golly, well, is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about before we go? We've covered a lot.
We have. I think the biggest thing is for people who are trying to quit drinking or maybe have tried and they have not been successful, like it's okay to try something else. And that's the biggest thing, and that's a message I try to give to people is I'm not saying that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. What I'm saying is if Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work for you, you could try something else. It is not the only solution, you know. And
Hmm.
then that's the biggest thing that I could share with people who are struggling. And that's the biggest thing. I think we covered just about everything else. We talked about a lot. So
All right. Well, where can people find you online?
so on social media, on Facebook or Instagram, my handle is at I Am Sober and Happy. You can find my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called the Sober and Happy Podcast. So those are the easiest places to find me. I have a website, soberandhappy.com. So you can find me pretty much anywhere. And one of the things that I encourage people to do, like when we talked about tips for when you're trying to get sober early, is to reach out to someone. Like if someone's listening to this podcast and they don't have someone they feel comfortable reaching out to, DM me on any of those. I answer every message I get. So like, and so if you're struggling and you need someone to reach out to, shoot me a message. Like I check the messages every day. I may not be able to get back to you right away, but I'll get back to you the same day, unless I'm out in the wilderness with no cell phone service, but I will get back to you. So that's a big thing. So you can find me on social media, listen to my podcast. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links to all that on the podcast show notes page at paultrammell.com/dream chasers and eccentrics. Again, Tim, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love what you're doing. It's great that you reached out to me at the time of my life where I'm chasing the dream big. So
right
I
on.
love being on your podcast. I love what you're doing. It's a mixture of both things I'm doing. I'm being sober and I'm chasing big dreams now. So
that's what it's all about.
Love the message you're giving people.
That's what it's all about. Awesome. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. You can find the podcast Dream Chasers and Eccentrics anywhere you get your podcasts, or at paultrammell.com/dream chasers and eccentrics. And you can find Tim's podcast at soberandhappy.com.